So you're saying that given that you're in the Sonoran Desert, the head is often taken from the site where the body is.
I didn't say often. I think your question was, is it unusual? And I said it's unusual. It's as usual for the skull to be missing in a disarticulated body as it is for the head to be intact.
So 50-50.
It happens both ways. And the longer a body lays, if I may, the longer a body lays out in our desert, and I'm sure this holds in any wilderness, and the Sonoran Desert is a wilderness, the more likely critters are going to find the body. And they're going to chew off the fingers, chew off the toes if they can, open the rib cage. The ribs are very soft and easy. Eat all the viscera. Start jerking on the upper limbs and pulling them off because there's no bony attachment between our upper limb and our thorax. So they frequently remove, after they've chewed off the fingers of a hand, and maybe the whole hand, they can remove a whole arm. So it's not unusual in our environment for the clavicle, the scapula, the upper arm bone, and the two lower arm bones to be missing on one or both sides from a place where we think we can tell by soil staining where the person decomposed.
So, doctor, in your experience, is the head often located where the person died?
Asked and answered repeatedly.
I'm not sure I have an answer, Your Honor.
I think you have. He said it's, you can't say 50-50, but he says it's pretty common either way. Was that your testimony?
I'm sorry, Judge.
Your testimony was that it's pretty common either way, whether or not the head was located with the rest of the remains or somewhere else.
The longer a body lays out there, the more likely this cranium or skull won't be found with the other remains. But if you go out in a day or a week before the body, all the soft tissue is removed, then it's more likely that the head will be articulated to the spinal column.
Isn't it true that on January 15th, 2020, you told investigator Heidel that the head is almost always located with the body?
In fresh bodies,
What if the body's been laying out for a while?
the longer a body
I'll
is,
let him go ahead. Go ahead.
the longer a body lays out in the wilderness, the more likely critters will get to it. And the more likely different bones will be separated from one another.
Are you familiar with the study by Maximilian Cantu?
You have to give me more information. I know the name. You have to give me more information.
Maximilian Cantu worked in your lab, is that right?
He was an intern, I believe.
He cited you in the acknowledgement section for overseeing the report that he did. Do you recall that?
I don't.
Maximilian Cantu did a report over a 4-year period involving the Sonoran Desert and the work at your office, your lab, looking at the recovery of remains for individuals. Do you recall Maximilian Cantu working?
He wrote I believe he wrote a scientific article for the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Am I correct?
Yes. And are you aware that Mr. Cantu's study of your lab found that the human skull, the cranium, is located with the body of the person that died 88% of the time?
Objection, testifying, and Rule 16, Judge.
It's not Rule 16, and I don't think it's testifying. I think it's okay.
Can you give me the year that Mr. Cantu published that?
Sure. It was published in 2014. Mr. Cantu looked at a 4-year period, picked different years that your lab had worked on bodies that have been recovered, including coincidentally 2012. And based on the study of the 4 years, concluded, much like Hagelin, that the cranium is found with the body in 88% of the cases analyzed at your lab.
I'm sure that's accurate. Max was a smart kid in 2010 and 2014, but things have changed. The PMI, the post-mortem interval. And Max would have been looking at border crossers. He would have been looking at surface deposits, people who died in the desert and were recovered sometime afterwards. The post-mortem interval, that's the time between death and the authorities finding and recovering the body. That has increased several fold since 2014. So it was more usual between 2000 and 2014 for bodies, somewhat intact bodies, to be found. Now it's just the opposite. It's more usual since 2014 that we get a bone or two or 5 or 6.
So when Mr. Cantu concludes the skull is often not scavenged at all, as he states on page 42, you're saying that's changed in the last 7 years?
That's exactly what I just tried to tell you.
You visited the scene in this case, Doctor?
I have not.
Do you agree with me that it'd be valuable to visit the scene where the remains are found?
I don't know how that would help me.
Well, you said earlier on direct that the geographical terrain matters a great deal in how body parts are.
That wasn't my charge. The defense asked me to evaluate some defects in the bone and whether or not I could opine on what caused those defects.
You didn't view topographical maps of the area where the remains were recovered, did you?
I looked at maps.
Did you review the drone video in this case?
I don't believe so.
Are you particularly familiar with the Vallecito area?
I'm not.
And we live in a mountainous region here as opposed to the Sonora Desert. Is that right?
Having spent some time in Lake City, I kind of understand the terrain down here.
You've examined over 3,000 people who died in the desert over the last 20 years. Is that right?
2,000. 3,000 have died. I've had my hands on about 2,000.
And that's a very different environment than here, right?
Absolutely.
For example, I was struck by, on direct, you said, it's not unusual for dogs to bring human bones into the yard and to their home. Is that right?
That's right.
Would you be surprised to learn it might be unusual in the state of Colorado for dogs to be running up to the back door with human bones in their mouth?
It's likely only unusual because you don't have the number of dead people in the wilderness that's near housing developments as we do in Arizona.
And that's because your job is to try to identify and locate loved ones of individuals who die in what's called undocumented border crossings.
Not because of my job, counselor. It's because of all these dead people in the desert.
What I'm saying is you're doing valuable work trying to identify individuals who died in the desert during what's called an undocumented border crossing.
Thank you. We think the families appreciate our efforts.
That's the work you do.
Most of the work I do.
And in your region, exposure to the sun is the leading cause of death for those who are engaging in what's called an undocumented border crossing. Is that right?
It's not sun, it's heat.
So, for example, from 2006 through 2012, your lab looked at 1,314 cases. The vast majority of those people die of exposure.
Of the presumed migrants, the vast majority, over 50%, we cannot tell how they died because their bodies are decomposed or skeletalized.
Given the geographical terrain of where you're located and the environmental factors, only 4% died of homicide.
That sounds about right. Very fewer homicides.
So 52 of the 1,314 from that 6-year period. Is that right?
I'm guessing you're reading from our annual report, so you've got numbers that I'd have to look up, but that sounds about right.
And in determining whether those 4%, that number, were a homicide, you look at all the surrounding circumstances as well. Am I right?
I don't look at them.
That's the job of the forensic pathologist.
Our medical legal investigators and our forensic pathologists.
And they look at the circumstances under which the person went missing, statements from the family, relationship dynamics, pre-existing health conditions, and so on. Is that right?
Are you talking about border crossers still?
Yes, sir.
The vast majority of the homicides of border crossers is cartel or gang related, and those bodies are found the day the person dies, which means I don't have any role in those. So the pathologist can tell, it's usually gunshot trauma, what the cause of death was. They infer manner of death because it's going to be very little investigation because it usually happened out in the hinterlands. Because they're foreign national, local law enforcement doesn't use the same resources. But the important point is for those homicides, I almost never have involvement. I can think of one case where dry skull came in. with a bullet hole in it, and we recovered the lead slug from inside the skull. But usually on homicide, they play no role.
And I'll just bring it back to something you talked about on direct, if I may. You talked about person falls off the cliff, they die of perimortem fractures, right?
The fracture, yeah, if it's a skull fracture, then this happens occasionally.
Person falls off a cliff, they die, skull fracture, perimortem.
Right, perimortem trauma, blunt force trauma, the pathologist would probably rule manner of death, accident, cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head.
Accident, the person actually fell off the cliff,
Right.
doctor? As opposed to looking at all the surrounding circumstances to determine whether the person was actually pushed off the cliff.
This is not my role as a forensic anthropologist. Investigators do this.
The fractures the person would suffer if they fell or was pushed off the cliff would be perimortem.
Fracture would be the same. The cause of death would be the same. The manner would be different if the pathologist, if the medical examiner got enough information through law enforcement or investigators that this person was pushed versus fell.
One of the things you look for in your work, because you're trying to locate and identify people who died while trying to cross the border. That's some of what you do, right?
They have crossed the border, then they died in Sonoran Desert in Arizona.
Thank you. So you look for their personal effects. That's part of that work.
I don't. We have investigators that do that.
And the investigators look for the personal effects because they're trying to identify the individual.
We're trying to
Section
develop.
relevance to this whole line, Judge, beyond the scope.
I'm going to sustain it. I mean, it's a little bit outside his expertise. I know he knows about it, but it makes sense. I don't think we need to go there.
What was the last part of what you said, Your Honor? I'm sorry.
You're done with that area.
And we've touched on, but I just want to follow up on the environment and environmental factors in Pima County, the Tucson area, are very different than what we have here in Colorado.
Yes.
Generally no snow, right?
We have mountains that have snow. We have the southernmost ski resort in Flagstaff, Arizona.
In the Sonora Desert, do you usually have snow?
We have mountains in Santa Cruz County that get snow in the wintertime,
It's fair to say you have high temperatures,
very high.
intense droughts.
I don't know what the word drought means, but it can go rainless and has, I think, for May and June of this year.
Would you agree with that statement that there's very little moisture in the Sonoran Desert for 11 months out of the year, and as a result of this, the body left in the desert will quickly have moisture removed?
We'll quickly have what?
Moisture removed?
Relevance, Judge.
I think it could be relevant. Go ahead.
I don't know about the 11-month statement, but when it is hot and the desert sands and dirt are hot, and a person dies outside, they will decompose so rapidly within hours. Fingertips, noses, earlobes will turn black. Your skin will turn black within a day. Your bodies will bloat within a day. That bloating will cause tearing of skin, and then that hot desert sand will wick away all the moisture. So then a week later, for instance, there's no moisture left. All the tissues are dry, and there's just a black, greasy spot underneath where the person decomposed.
Much of your work since the desert is dealing with coyote scavenging. Is that fair to say?
We think so. Yeah, we think in remote areas it's more likely coyote than dog.
And would you agree that a coyote, when it scavenges a body, it could eat through, for example, a shoe, socks, then eat the individual's toes?
If a person has leather boots on and blue jeans, they're more like, and the rest of the body has been fed on by coyotes, those areas are just as likely not to be attacked. But we have had instances where blue denim jeans are torn, boots are chewed into. So,
And the boots are chewed into, or the sneakers chewed into, because the coyote is going for the meat of the human body.
but I'd imagine, and not being a coyote, I'd imagine it's both bone and meat, and it's the odor of the decomposition. Tennis shoes pose no barrier. They're torn away by coyote scavenging, and then the foot is eaten, as far up the leg as they can before the bone gets too thick.
And in this case, you're aware, obviously, from what you said earlier, that Dylan Redwine's toes, left and right foot, were eaten and then found in scat.
I couldn't tell if they were finger or toe bone, but that vial was labeled recovered from scat.
And you've testified and noted previously that you examined the postcranial remains, right?
I did. I think there were 5 or 6 limb bones.
I'm going to put 309 on the screen. You mentioned how a tennis shoe could be eaten through by a coyote. Is that something that, in your experience, would be consistent with a coyote scavenging?
Are you telling me that's Dylan Redwine's shoe?
I believe the evidence would say that it was Dylan Redwine's shoe, yes, sir.
I don't know. What's your question, Counselor?
Just what I asked. It's just,
Could you repeat it, please?
it's consistent with what you said, that a coyote scavenged Dylan Redwine's feet.
With the migrants, they frequently, because they're in heat stress, they frequently sit down, take their shoes off, take off everything but their underwear. That is not unusual. So in the coyote scavenging of migrants that have already started to disrobe, we see this all the time.
May I approach you?
Yes. Need glasses?
Your Honor, I'm a forensic anthropologist. Am I asked to look at clothing?
I don't know. I don't know what the question's going to be. And it's really not your objection, it's defense counsel's objection. So you can ask the question and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Your Honor. Take a look at Dylan's sock in front of you and tell me what evidence of scavenging you see there.
Objection, Judge. As iterated by the witness, beyond the scope. This has been talked about. He hasn't looked at the sock.
Well, I know he hasn't looked at the sock. Do you have any expertise in terms of what clothing would look like if a person's body had been scavenged? Do you have any experience as part of what you do?
Bodies that are fed on by coyotes, where the shoes are either chewed through or they've been removed. Socks are found. Many times they're tattered. Many times, excuse me, many times they're tattered.
Okay. So apparently he does have some experience, at least it's part of his job. I'm going to allow him to testify if you have other questions.
Sure. Can you tell the jury about the signs of scavenging you see on that sock, Doctor?
I'm not going to do that, Counselor. I'm not an expert in this. This looks to be a little footy sock that looks like it's intact. What relevance it has to my testimony, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry? Okay.
Okay.
Doctor, you testified, I'm sorry,
Let me hear your next question.
sure. You testified that the shoe of Dylan Redwine is consistent with coyote scavenging. I'm asking you to look at Dylan's
I didn't
sock
say that.
and tell us whether it's consistent
Wait,
with scat.
Hold on. One of you can talk at a
I'm
time.
asking you to-
Hold on, and I'm talking now, Mr. Doherty.
Yes, Your Honor.
Maybe I missed it. I don't remember him saying it was consistent with scavenging.
That's because I didn't, Your Honor.
Then you
Oh,
can't
I
talk
got
now
it.
either, okay? He said that sometimes, many times, migrants would be taking off their shoes, and so it wouldn't be consistent either way. So I think your question is inappropriate. I think the jury can look at whether or not the sock has been any type of damage to the sock, and I tend to agree that this witness should not be asked about that question.
And Your Honor, just to be clear, the court's ruling is because the witness is not qualified to determine whether the shoe is the result of coyote scavenging?
I think that mischaracterizes what Your Honor's been doing this morning.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand the distinction between...
He's trying to make an argument in front of the
One of you
jury.
talk at a time, and it's not your turn, is it? Go ahead.
I'm trying to understand the distinction between everything else we've heard about coyote scavenging from the doctor, and now why suddenly the doctor is saying he can't talk about the sock, and it's not relevant to what he has to say.
Well, the relevance is my determination, so he shouldn't be making that objection because he can't make objections.
Yes, Your Honor.
He just stated, I forgot what you just said. Hold on. Okay. He did state that there are many times, socks have been chewed through as part of what he's done. So I'm going to allow him to answer. Well, let me hear your question. I think I'm going to allow it to happen. But I didn't let you finish your record. I'm sorry, Mr. Bogan.
The witness has already testified what his expertise lies in, what he can testify to, and this is beyond the scope of direct.
I don't think it's necessarily beyond the scope in terms of what you're trying to show with this witness. There was a lot of testimony on direct about the ability of a coyote to take a skull a considerable distance, which is an issue in this case. So ask your question again.
Now I'm going to put 312 on the screen, or excuse me, 312 on the screen. Doctor, you can either look on the screen or you can look at the sock in front of you. Any indication that the sock was chewed on by a coyote?
No.
Would you agree that the best person to analyze the remains of Dylan Redwine would be a forensic anthropologist who works in Colorado?
I would agree that the best person to examine the remains that are found locally is a board-certified forensic anthropologist.
And fair to say then that when it comes to forensic anthropology, forensic anthropologists should stick to the area they are trained or worked in and defer to others who work in other different environments. Is that fair to say?
It's not fair to say.
Do you recall making that statement?
I'm sorry?
Do you recall making that statement yourself to Investigator Heidel?
I don't. You'd have to read me the transcript.
Would it be fair to say that you would defer to your colleagues who might have more experience in the type of environment we have here in Colorado?
I don't think there's an anthropologist in Colorado and maybe in the country that has seen animals, coyote scavenging of human beings more than I have. So I don't think there is a single expert that could say, no, Anderson, no, you're wrong. I think I have as much expertise as any board-certified forensic anthropologist in this country to look at skeletal remains and infer scavenging, canid scavenging versus vulture scavenging, and then amongst canids, speculate as to whether it's a dog or a coyote. I don't think any local anthropologist in this country has more experience in that than I do.
Certainly you have your opinion, Doctor, and you've done a lot of work, particularly in the desert area where bodies have been found. But are you disagreeing with your statement that it would be wise to let the person who is familiar with working in this environment give the opinion?
Asked and answered.
No, he didn't answer it. He wanted to know where, he wanted it read to him, I think, and that's just what happened.
I believe that for my own job. I believe that I and my two colleagues, because we have more experience in what happens in southern Arizona, we ought to be the people that examine the first choice of the people that examine bodies, skeletons found in southern Arizona. So I would agree with that.
Would you also agree, Doctor, that animal scavengers don't take the backpack from someone who's deceased that they're feeding on?
Boy, that's a new one on me. I have no idea what scavengers do with backpacks.
Do you agree with me that scavengers don't open the backpack and take the clothing from within the backpack?
I won't agree with you with that because I don't have any idea what animals do with backpacks.
And the times you described on direct where you're in a helicopter and you're following the coyotes around and you're doing all this work, have you ever seen them carrying a backpack as they run away from human bodies?
No.
Have you ever seen a scavenger or known a scavenger to take someone's cell phone away from their body?
This font of questions has been asked and answered, Judge. You could go through a whole litany of, like...
You know, it sounds familiar, though, doesn't it, Mr. Bogan? And I didn't like it when you did it either. So you can ask that a different way, I think, and then be done with it.
Have you ever known animal scavengers to take the personal effects of an individual, including, for example, backpack, clothing, cell phone, and debit card.
The court,
Yes.
the court just sustained an objection to this question.
No, I said he could ask it a different way. One question is fine. The answer was yes. There may be some follow-up now.
So you've known scavengers, you've seen scavengers take backpacks away from, and run a great distance from where a person has died?
That's not the question you asked, Counselor. I have seen backpacks torn open, presumably by the carnivore. Maybe there was food in there. Who knows? We have seen pack rats and other small mammals take wristwatches, and probably, yes, Counselor, cell phones, maybe because they're shiny, but they remove these items, these shiny items, and take them 10 yards, 20 yards, 100 yards away from the death site to their burrows.
Have you, in your experience, seen them remove those objects? Actually seen this, Doctor, from the entire area?
So you're asking me if I was present when the animals scavenged?
You said yes, you've seen animals take items away. And I'm asking, when you see the animals taking items away, have you seen them take them all the way away, just gone? I'm asking you a question based on what you just said. What'd you see?
No, I usually am not present where the body is found.
Your Honor, I have nothing further. Thank you.
All right, how long is your redirect going to be?
Probably 20 to 30, Judge.
Well, then we'll take a recess, okay? We'll start up again at 10 after. Thank you. Everybody rise for adjournment.